Zoom room to do, a spoken introduction, but anybody is welcome to do that in the chat if you would like. So it is 7 o'clock, and I would love for us to get going. I am the bouncer tonight, and so I will continue to admit people who are coming in through the waiting room, but I also have a little bit of an introduction here to do. So bear with me as I have both of those roles here. Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you are all here at our Rheticus Rewired. This means just by Zoom, Rheticus by Zoom. This is our Faith and Science Conversation series at St.Andrews. I am Amy Thoren. I am the pastor at St.Andrews Lutheran Church and Campus Center. Many of you know we have been hosting Faith and Science Conversations for many years at St.Andrews. We do this for a few reasons. We really want to strengthen the dialogue between people of faith and the scientific community, between these two communities. We want to build trust, of course. We would like to encourage learning between people of faith and the scientific community, acknowledging, of course, that there is overlap between the two as well. We believe that these two are not mutually exclusive, and we really want to seek how both communities can be edified by this dialogue. We are recording this event this evening. A lot of people asked if we would please do that. So we will have the video up on our YouTube channel later this week, and we will share it and send it around to anybody who would like to see it. So we sent you a program earlier today through email. The formatting might have gotten a little bit goofy through the interwebs, but I hope that you can see the content fairly well. We are honored to have Becky Smith with us this evening. Her full bio is in the program that we sent, and you can read that, of course, anytime. Becky is Associate Professor of Pathobiology and 4 other things at the University of Illinois. She originally hails from Western New York and grew up in the Methodist tradition. So she found her way to the Lutheran Church and to epidemiology through various experiences and various studies at Gustavus Adolphus College, Kansas State, and finally Cornell University for her PhD. She is currently serving as the epidemiologist on UIUC's SHIELD team, helping to guide COVID-19 response on campus and beyond. Becky will be offering some words first and then facilitating questions and conversation. We really like to emphasize that we want to share learning in these events. And so we like to kind of distinguish this from kind of a straight lecture. So you are welcome, of course, to put any questions into the chat. I will be fielding those questions. We may not get to all the questions that come in that way, but of course we will do our best. We do like to begin our Rheticus events with a mini interview to break the ice a little bit and to get to know our presenter in a way that we might not have a chance to do in a lecture hall. So we do have a few fun questions for Becky. I'm going to, again, keep admitting people who are entering. Where are they? Okay. As we go forward. So first, Becky, can you share, please, an experience, a story from your life that helps us see why or how you became interested in epidemiology?
There are many, but the one that would work, I think, is that the summer after my first year of vet school, I actually did a trip with Christian Vet Missions, which is a missionary group made up of veterinarians and veterinary technicians, specifically to share God's love through veterinary medicine, which it's a great idea, I think. And we were in Mongolia for 2 months. And one thing I really saw there was how devastating infectious disease can be to these communities. And so in Mongolia, when I was there, 75% of people were still nomadic. So they're nomadic herders still, and they rely on their herds. And they would have these waves of foot and mouth disease, they'd have anthrax, all sorts of different diseases would come through and wipe out herds, or just bad winters, and how that could just really push people into poverty. And that got me interested in the idea of how important population health would be for people's health and well-being.
Lovely. Thank you so much for sharing. Not everybody in this Zoom room shares the same faith, and not everybody is a person of particularly religious faith. But we still would like to know why, from your perspective,
What is that?
Why people
I think we could see more people if we did that. I'm not
just
sure.
gonna mute everybody here quickly. Except you, Becky, can re-unmute yourself. Becky, why should people of faith care about or be interested in your research or your material?
So what I work with is population health. So it's not health of individuals, but it's health of people in groups. And I can't think of anything that people of faith would care more about, because whichever faith you're in, there is usually a call to care for those who are less fortunate, or to care for those around you, to care for your neighbors. And the work that I do is all about supporting and caring for those who need it, and protecting the entire world, and protecting all communities. And I just can't think of anything that would be more appropriate for people of faith.
Thank you. Yeah, we have heard, Becky, that you sing. I have heard actually you sing in a language that is not English. In how many languages can you sing?
I don't even know anymore, but off of the top of my head, English, Spanish, French, Welsh, Latin, Mongolian, Swahili. There's probably more. I don't know any German songs off the top of my head, though. I'm sure Pastor Amy is very disappointed in that. But oh, Swedish, of course. Having been at Gustavus for 4 years, I can sing in Swedish.
Beautiful. I'm not disappointed at all. I celebrate so many languages. We also know, Becky, that you have been out delivering Girl Scout cookies.
That is true.
We need to know, Becky, do we need to wash our Girl Scout cookies before we eat them?
No. In fact, one of the things that we've learned in the last year is that we don't really need to wipe down our groceries at all. So if you're still wiping down groceries, you can stop. It's not really a risk at all. So go ahead.
Excellent, thank you. Some of these questions are intentionally a little bit playful. Becky, what does an epidemiologist do for fun these days?
A lot of that, actually. We have many jokes about it, but basically get away from the news, spend time with your family. It's been a hard time. We're all very tired right now.
Yeah.
A year ago, we were all excited that finally people didn't mistake us for dermatologists, which was actually pretty common a year ago. And then finally people understood what we did. And now we'd really rather go back to the time when people say, oh, you study skin, do you? Because yeah, I wish my skills were not so needed.
Yeah. I think I can speak on behalf of everybody gathered here that I would like to just say thank you for all the work that you are doing on the SHIELD team and beyond. It's such important work and incredible work. So thank you, Becky, for for putting up with our more playful way to begin a conversation that really is quite serious. Again, a huge welcome to Becky Smith, and thank you so much for being with us tonight. Becky, you have the floor.
Well, thank you. I am not going to do a presentation, a PowerPoint, anything like that, but I have some thoughts written down that I'll just go through, but I'm happy to open it up to discussion, and it might be easier to do that at the end, but if somebody has a burning question, go ahead and put in the chat and Pastor Amy will pop up and let me know if I don't see it. So just to start out, I came to Epi completely by chance. From the age of 6, I was going to be a veterinarian. I was going to be a dairy veterinarian. I was going to go back to the farms, and that's all I wanted to do from the age of 6. I loved math and science and puzzles, but I said, no, I'm going to be a veterinarian. That's what I want to do. So I didn't think of doing anything else. And then when I was at Gustavus, which one of the reasons I went to Gustavus is because they had a pre-vet program that was really interesting to me. So I went to Gustavus, but the motto or the mission statement at Gustavus is preparing students for lives of service. They really do that. They joke that that's one reason their endowment is so small, because lives of service don't pay very well, but they really do focus on preparing students to live in service. So I started to get interested in social justice and international development and all of those things. But then I said, no, I'm going to be a vet, because that's what I said I was going to do. And then it was in vet school. So that first summer I went to Mongolia, and I had that experience working with people who really relied on their animals. And I said, this is great, but I can continue to do this. I can be a vet and do mission work. And that's wonderful. And then my second year of vet school, I took a herd management class, actually, but it was taught by a field epidemiologist. And I got to the sense of how you can use this data management and this math and apply it to veterinary medicine. And I said, oh, well, this is what I want to do, because I loved the math and the problem solving, and getting to actually do that within the context of veterinary medicine. Just, it was a dream come true. But then I've just kind of stumbled my way into where I am now from there. My first realm or dive into veterinary medicine was really focused on herd health. So cattle. My background is in cattle. And the goal was to help farmers stay in business. I don't know how much you know about the cattle industry right now, but dairy cattle, the price of milk for farmers is actually below the cost of production, and has been for years. And a lot of dairy farmers are barely making it, and a lot of them are not making it. We are losing old dairy farms at an alarming rate. So a lot of my goal was try to keep farms in business, keep these people who care about our animals and our food in business, and make healthier, cheaper, better food. That was just really what I was doing until I came to UIUC. So everything that I did up to UIUC was all about farms and cows. There's not many cows here in Illinois. I ended up coming here actually because my husband was offered a job, and they have this wonderful dual career hire program. So my department hired me because they were offered to hire me with some support from the provost, so that we could both come here together. He studies corn, so this is a great place for him, but not so great for cattle. So I started to get involved with other things, including human health. Now, when you're working with cows, the only real human behavior thing you have to think about is economics, because really that's, given the situation farmers are in, they have to make ends meet. So it has to be an economic decision. You get into the human health side, economics is not so much the important, it can be, but less so. And you get into a lot of other factors of behavior. And that gets complicated and it gets messy. And since coming here, I've gotten more onto the human side of epi, and I've got to tell you, it is hard. Some of you will have seen my co-leader of my sub-team within SHIELD, Nigel Goldenfeld, who is a physicist, and he does these brilliant models, does really good work. Well, last summer, he gave a talk entitled, "Epidemiology is not rocket science, it's harder." And it really is. It's much more complicated because people are hard to predict. So this can be a problem within science because science tends to think of itself as lab-based and logical, and that there is this way to do things that you ask a question and you design a study and you get an answer. And epi does not work like that, because epi is somewhere in between lab science and social science, and it's not one or the other, it's kind of in between. And that makes it very hard for us because we have to live in both worlds. And so we have to balance the social side with the lab science side. And it really doesn't help that the most common phrase in epi, because it's so complicated, is "it depends." In fact, we have a whole community on Twitter, Epi Twitter, and the tagline of Epi Twitter is "it depends." We even have a logo that says "it depends," because every question you ask us, our answer is going to start with, "Well, it depends, but..." Medicine does not like uncertainty. Doctors are not trained to show uncertainty. Laboratory scientists are not trained to show uncertainty. They're trained to show, this is the answer. This is, I said this was going to be what I was going to look at, and this is the answer that I found, and so this is what we are going to do. And this is a known problem within medicine, that the idea of uncertainty and embracing uncertainty, that's antithetical to medical training. So we are the people in medicine who come in and say, "It depends. There is no one answer. You have to be willing to accept that there might be multiple ways to do this." And that's a hard thing for a lot of both lab scientists and medical professionals to deal with. We also have the problem that social sciences have, by necessity, embraced the concept of social justice. And you may have seen this, that within social sciences, within psychology and sociology, you'll see more people who are willing to be advocates and willing to speak for social justice and speak against racism, speak against misogyny, speak up. Whereas lab-based scientists tend to view that as that's outside of our realm. Well, since we're kind of in between the two, we see the importance of speaking up for social justice. And this is definitely part of where my faith comes in, is that I see the importance of the social justice parts. But my home, my departmental home, is full of people who spend their days looking at proteins on viruses. And if I tell them that it is important for my work to speak up for social justice, they do not understand. And so I have to somehow bring that side of my life to work, to deal with people for whom it's not something that they have to think about at work. So this has been a tension, and for epidemiologists who live in a school of public health, it's a lot easier because they are surrounded by other people who are in the same realm. But for people like me, and I have friends who are in other places where we're epidemiologists outside of a school of public health, we have to live with that tension of being the social justice warrior within the department, of being the person who brings the ideas of justice into work, But also when we're dealing with the social justice side of things, the people who bring the lab side in, who bring in the math and the biology, and that's really, you're never at home. You're always in between. It's an interesting place to be. Specifically to right now, this is really important because we're dealing with this pandemic, and historically, these marginalized groups have been blamed for infectious diseases. And you will hear this rhetoric even now with the immigration debates of, you don't want those people here with their dirty habits and their dirty diseases. I've been hearing lately, there are Asian Americans being attacked and killed in some cities because of the concept that they're the ones to blame for this. We can blame them for this pandemic. And it's because in a lot of racist traditions, these other races are considered to be weaker or dirtier or to have culturally bad habits. And it's a difficult thing to deal with, to address racism from a biological perspective, which, by the way, biologically, there is no basis for race. There is more variation within races genetically than there is between races. So biologically, there is no basis for race. So there's no basis for any biological differences. What matters is racism. But when epidemiologists now stand up and say, okay, we're in this middle of this pandemic, and by the way, racism is a public health threat, we get a lot of pushback because that's not a biological statement, but it is actually a biological statement. So the longer you study diseases, you know how everything is interconnected. So nutrition and stress and community connections, those are all part of your physical health, and also all of your cultural connections. So all of that is important for your health. Also, racism leads to people being marginalized into jobs that may not allow them to have the luxury that I do of staying home and working from this nice room all the time with my plants and my warmth and my cats in my lap. So because groups of people are marginalized and pushed into these jobs where they are forced to be in person, their risk is raised because of the systemic racism in our society. So their risk is raised because they've been marginalized into poverty and into stressful situations, and so their biological health may be affected, but also because they are forced into positions where they're more likely to be infected. And all of that is part of public health and epidemiology. And it's way beyond this whole nice, simple in the lab or just on my whiteboard doing the math side of my work. There's also a lot of issues within global health. I don't know if any of you saw or heard about the press conference today from the World Health Organization team that went to Wuhan to investigate. Many people have been blaming the people of Wuhan for the epidemic, for the pandemic, because, well, have you seen what they eat? They eat this terrible stuff. Honestly, the things that they sell in their wet markets are no different than my family when we're out camping eating squirrel stew, which my family does. Yeah, I'm from rural Western New York. We're rednecks. We eat squirrel stew, certainly eat venison. That's no different from the people of Wuhan having their wet markets where they have different wild meats for sale. But there's some amount of colonial attitude towards other societies that cause us to look down on them and say there must be something that they did wrong and we can blame them. And so part of public health now is actually speaking up and saying it's not their culture that is to blame. It is not that they are a lesser culture. It is that humankind actually is changing the world, and that's causing more animals to come into contact with people, and that's putting us all at risk. So is it their culture or is it our consumption habits? But again, this gets into areas that people say, well, that's outside of your lane, you stay in your lane. We've heard a lot of that in the last year, stay in your lane. Yeah, our lane is pretty broad because we're at this nexus of biology and social sciences. So coming into this from a faith perspective, and I have to be able to quote my favorite theologian, because you have, I get a chance to quote a theologian when talking about my work, but the concept of justice is an important one for me in my work, but also in my faith life. And Tillich wrote about justice, that justice is always violated if men, people, are dealt with as if they were things. And I think that that is an important thing for us to think about when we're thinking about public health, but also for those of us within public health to think about. Because I keep talking about everybody outside of epidemiology right now. I'm going to turn the gaze a little bit towards epi. We have a tendency to look at people as things that we can kind of organize around our boards and say, okay, this is where you go and this is how we deal with you. And if everybody would just listen to us, we'd be much better off. But justice does not work like that. In order for justice to prevail, we have to think about allowing people to be people, and rather than dictating about guiding them. So part of my work, and it's again difficult because I want to say to people, here are the things that you need to do to keep us all safe. And if we all just stayed home for 4 weeks, we'd get this done and we'd be fine. But then I have to remember, not everybody can do that. Not everybody can just stay home for 4 weeks. Not everybody can do that physically because maybe they can't afford not to not work. Not everybody can do that mentally. Some people live alone. I can say that because I live with my family and I have a 3-year-old coming to give me hugs. But if you live alone, that's going to be a much harder ask. Not everybody can just deal with the isolation. Not everybody has a big, beautiful house to live in. It's much easier to say everybody should just stay home for 4 weeks if you have all of this space, rather than you have a family of 4 in a 500 square foot apartment. So we have to understand that people are people and we have to let them be people. And so we have to help them deal with how to protect themselves within their context. And there was a lot of pushback against epidemiologists over the summer because we supported Black Lives Matter protests. And people said, how dare you? We're in the middle of a pandemic. Why would you support Black Lives Matter protests? That's, people are exposing themselves. And the reason that we supported that is that we know that systemic racism is making this pandemic worse. We know that systemic racism is killing people as much as COVID-19. And so protests are as much medicine as anything we do. So we have to balance that justice between the protecting the community and protecting this community that is suffering. So that's been an interesting thing to deal with. Another thing that I like to think about is how epi works. We tend to work from the ethics perspective. So epidemiologists tend to be the home of ethics within medical research. that we tend, and that's certainly one of my roles with SHIELD, is that I coordinate all of our ethics training and all of our IRB proposals. I make sure that everybody is protecting human health data and human privacy. And yeah, that's certainly an intersection between faith and science, but ethics doesn't go far enough. Ethics is the Hippocratic do no harm. It's the, okay, here's the minimum level of what you need to do to protect everybody. So there's somebody who recently wrote a great article called The Virtuous Epidemiologist, which is the call to, instead of being kind of reactive, ethical, of just making sure that you meet the minimum, that asking why you're doing what you're doing, is it from a place of virtue? Are you actually choosing to do things for the right reasons? Rather than just making sure that what you're doing in the right way, but you're actually choosing the path for the right reasons, and that your motivations are appropriate. So that's another thing that I think is worth talking about. And then, since I grew up Methodist, I have to quote Wesley, because I didn't grow up Lutheran. I became Lutheran as an adult. So I quote Wesley like you'll quote Luther. But Wesley said that we should do all the good you can by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. So that's kind of my driving force, is how to use my career to live out Wesley's words, which I think sums up what Christian life in practice needs to be, or a life of faith in practice needs to be, which is doing good for people. And if that means that I have to get political, I will get political. If that means I have to speak up, I will speak up, but that's what I have to do. And I know I promised when I wrote up the summary that I would talk about how my work influenced my faith a little. Just so you know, I grew up conservative Republican. My home county went hard for Trump in the last election. That's what I came from. The more I work in EPI, the more radicalized I become towards the fact that we need universal health care and we need social justice, and that's become worked into my faith. That my conservative upbringing was, it was considered part of the faith, but it was just part of the culture. So it was part of cultural Christianity rather than the actual faith we were in. The more time I've spent in public health, the more I say, no, my faith says that we have to be liberal and we have to be radical for justice, because there is no other way to live faith. So yeah, my work has radicalized my faith, and my faith has pushed me to be radical at work. So good thing I have tenure now, so I can be as radical as I want to be. So that's the end of the prepared thoughts or ramblings that I had. So happy to have some discussion now.
Becky, thank you so much. I think a lot of us here, probably our brains are like firing in a lot of different directions. A couple of questions came up. One early on about your experience in Mongolia. What was the health of these nomadic peoples like? Again, there are a few questions about, how we can talk to people who are hesitant about COVID, about the vaccine, but are not anti-vaxxers, right? They think the vaccine was rushed and not tested for long-term side effects. And then there's, I should probably stop there. Those are the first two questions. There's another longer one. Why don't we stop there? Again, if people have questions, please put them in the chat. I think it's absolutely fine as well to unmute, as long as that kind of goes, not like, too many people at the same time. But yeah, so Becky, if you want to maybe address those two earlier questions.
Sure, we can start with the health of the nomadic people. So I've worked with people in Mongolia, but also with semi-nomadic people in Uganda. And I have a colleague and collaborator who is a pastoralist from Ethiopia, very proud pastoralist. He's a professor at Addis Ababa University, and he tells you repeatedly that he is a pastoralist. So he comes from a nomadic people. The health of these nomadic societies, it depends on how much they're allowed to continue their traditional ways in part. So in Mongolia, they were not a Soviet republic, but they were in all but name. And the Soviets tried to put them into communal farms. And that did not work because the environment of Mongolia does not allow you to settle with your animals. The reason they're nomadic is that they have to be to keep their animals alive. But once they returned to their more traditional lifestyle, their health improved greatly, but still a lot got moved to the cities, and there were major issues with alcoholism. And they still have issues, especially with mining and wildcat mining, because of the kind of breakdown in traditional society in places. Similarly, in Uganda, the group that I worked with there, where they were able to maintain their traditional practices, they did fairly well. But when the government would come in and impose some restriction on them, they would often end up pushing people into poverty, pushing people into violence, and their health would suffer. It's not to say they're perfect, because there's still periods of famine in these places. And so there are definitely ways that they could be improved, but the external forces never did much for their health. And in fact, it usually made it worse. So that definitely started me thinking about how we approach global health, because the colonial approach definitely did not improve health in this case. Thinking about anti-vaxxers, to completely switch topics, there's a lot of material out there on anti-vax. And the best way to deal with somebody who is vaccine hesitant is to listen to their concerns and to let them express their concerns. Because my tendency is to jump to facts. And I know most scientists, we like to do that. We like to jump to facts. Facts will not convince somebody who made their decision based on fear or emotion. So we have to listen and understand. And if it is facts that they need, you can provide facts. But if it's an issue of fear and emotion, then you need to address that first.
Yeah, that's I think a lot of us in this Zoom room would affirm that that's really, really a challenge, right? As we watch, the social media. Hello, Ziggy. We'll see if maybe we want to do an introduction there in a couple of seconds. Becky, there was another comment. I think it's more of a comment than a question. It seems apparent that we in the United States will be able to beat this pandemic. We as a nation need to be concerned about beating this pandemic worldwide. We need to make the vaccines available to people in third world countries. Ironically, it is in our own interest to do this, since as long as COVID is active and mutating anywhere, we are at risk that it will mutate into a form that will render our current vaccines ineffective. I believe that was from either Van or Kathy. Previous questions, I didn't name names. I apologize, but I think they were also from Van or Kathy, and then Mark.
That is a very good point. That the issues of justice around vaccine distribution, and it yeah. The other day, it occurred to me that this during Black History Month, this is a great time to quote Martin Luther King Jr. And he said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Disease transmission anywhere is a threat to health everywhere. That we cannot control the pandemic, locally, and certainly not in the US. Small countries have managed to do well. Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam's done amazingly. Senegal has done well. Mongolia, they've all done very well, but only by keeping to themselves and being very careful amongst themselves. This country is not going to do that. So the only way that this country is going to control the pandemic is by making sure that it's controlled everywhere. And there's also the justice issue.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. We have a question from Sam. Sam writes, "This is great, Becky. Going back to your great line on protests, I wondered if there are any studies that show that these forms of justified catharsis are beneficial to health outcomes."
I don't know if there's been any studies about that, but it is a fascinating question. And that would definitely be something to ask people who are more specialist in health disparities than me. I do a little work on health disparities, but it's not my area of expertise. There are definitely epidemiologists who I think could possibly study that.
And, you know, because there are so many people here, I do not know everybody in our Zoom room personally. If anyone has this knowledge, if any of you happen to study these things, you know, you are more than welcome to, again, to unmute or type something in the chat there that could be helpful for the whole group.
Yeah, I will say that there are studies that have shown the detrimental effects of racism on health.
So we definitely have plenty. I think we have plenty more time here for more questions or comments. We did not plan to break up into smaller groups. So are there more questions from the group? Again, you're welcome. You're welcome to unmute and speak those questions, or you're welcome to write questions in the chat. Becky, I was particularly just so fascinated by this sort of how you navigate this between hard and soft science, right? What we call hard and soft science, and the fact that you are working with these very unpredictable creatures that are humans. And when you talk about, that justice is not necessarily something that's talked about in science, I have a question, because actually St.Andrews does know, or I know fairly well, a honeybee brain researcher who just finished his PhD. And one of his passions, he wants to use his science to help empty American jails, empty American prisons. And so I guess my question is kind of a personal one. What do you experience, from your scientific colleagues in terms of their own kind of commitments or passion for justice?
So this isn't universally true, but there is definitely a generational divide. And for full disclosure, I am an Xennial, meaning that I am at the cusp of Gen X and millennial. So I'm of the younger generations that we were raised with a little bit more of we were raised by baby boomer parents who had themselves rebelled and pushed for justice in the world. And so I think we were raised with a little bit more of that mindset. There are certainly senior scientists who are very much on the justice path, but a lot of my more senior colleagues do basically, they don't even understand the outreach work that I do. So justice is well beyond them. And the slightest pushes for changes to the system are difficult for them because the system has been good to them and they like the system the way it is. I think that they just assume that it's an epi thing, but I'm trying to slowly build up a scientific community that really embraces that all of science can be pushing for more justice in the world. But there definitely is a generational divide.
Yeah. Thank you. We have a question from Jean. Throughout the ages and across all fields, those most knowledgeable, while they realize there are yet unknowns, there is the belief that what is known is correct. But some items are later shown to be incorrect. Any thoughts of items in your area deemed accurate that might be flipped? Interesting question.
To quote somebody I saw on Twitter earlier this year, being an epidemiologist means never having to say you're certain. We don't believe in certainty.
Mm.
This is one reason our tagline is "It depends."
Mm.
There are certain things that we stick to pretty strongly, but there's not much that people would stake their career on that, yeah, at least within my realm of people, we're a little bit less dogmatic. Again, generationally there are some more senior epidemiologists who are very much set in their beliefs of a certain thing because they've spent their careers on that certain thing. But as a field as a whole, we have fads and ways that we approach problems on methodology, but I don't think there's any one thing that we're absolutely dogmatic about because we know how complicated everything is.
I really appreciate that response because actually my own interactions with scientists over the years is that they are some of the most wildly open-minded folks, right? I mean, they're very, they recognize how little they know, right? In spite of research and experiments. And so they really, my experience with scientists is that there's incredible and very profound humility, which is really, again, it might be one of these kind of stereotypes that people have between these two communities, because I that scientists think they have the answers, but I have found the opposite in a lot of ways.
I think part of the problem my class was discussing today, scientists are notoriously bad at communication.
Okay, so now we're warming up here. Yes. I'll just read a couple of comments. Ouch, says Kathy, and Van. Kathy and I are boomers. Life has been good to us. I hope we're not too set in our ways. Thank you.
I'm sure not. And I should say that while I have radicalized, my parents are slowly also radicalizing.
Interesting. So that's a really nice lead in actually to the next question in the queue, which is from Cindy Shepard. Can you talk a little bit about your faith and your work and your work influenced you and how it influenced your radicalization, moving away from your conservative background towards something more progressive? How did that happen?
It's hard to say. I mean, it started at Gustavus because Gustavus is a very progressive community. So it certainly definitely began there. There was a big movement towards social justice and towards thinking of others a lot more. Republicans were definitely in the minority in that community. And so I got exposed to different mindsets. I also just got exposed to different groups of people. So if you've never been to Western New York, it is extremely white, just more than Central Illinois white. There was only one non-white family in my entire high school. So I just wasn't exposed to other cultures until I came away. So that started to help. And then the more I studied about this, the more it just kind of sank in. So no great revelation, but just slow and gradual.
Always fascinating, of course, to hear those stories. Yeah. Christopher asks, how often do people have a relapse in symptoms during the fight with COVID? Also, what is the average amount of time after someone tests positive will it take before they test negative? If you know these answers.
Relapse and symptoms, I'm not sure about. Some people have what's called long COVID, which is that they just continue to have symptoms, and we are not sure how long that will go on because some have now been 6 months or more and it continues. So that will be a thing to study for a long time. As far as how long it takes somebody to test negative again, it's very variable. So some people, 10 days, they get released from isolation, they're negative. Other people, we've had months and months of consistent positives. We don't know why exactly yet. Again, area of study. There's so much to be studied still. So much we still don't know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, it depends. The answer is it depends.
It depends.
We just don't know what it depends on yet. I always tell my students that if they tell me it depends, they have to tell me it on what. We don't know yet.
Yeah. Thank you again, Becky. So there's a question from Sonia who's watching with Sam. Sonia writes, this is Sonia and a fellow MPHer. Some of my colleagues have expressed a desire to conduct health outcomes research outside of the context of race. How would you start a conversation with folks that share that sentiment to stress the importance of contextualized research?
Oh, that is a good question. So, and this is a question that we are really dealing with right now. So, there is a lot of work still to be done to demonstrate the effects of racism in different fields in health. And I think a lot of that work still needs to be done so that people understand that racism can play a role whether or not they think it does. But it's going to depend, it depends. It's going to depend on the health outcomes in question. Is it something that can be affected by community context? Is it something that can be affected by the stress of living with racism, or by, and this is a big one that we run into, is the medical community tends to discount the symptoms of especially Black individuals, but also Hispanic. So we know that recently a study was done in something like 30% of medical students in the 2000s said that they believed that Black people felt less pain than white people did. So this is still something, and that understanding came from research that has been in medical textbooks for hundreds of years, and that research was done to justify slavery. So we know that the entire medical community has been built on a racist platform. And so kind of opening people's eyes to that, I think, will help. The problem is that how do you get them to that conversation? So a few years ago, I held a seminar. I have this 1 credit seminar that I do just so we can discuss and read different things. And the seminar was called Decolonizing Biomedical Research. And we had great discussions and we learned a lot, but we only had one token white male in the room, and that token white male was LGBT. So we did not have a single cis het white male in that room. The people who needed to be in that conversation were not there. And that's a difficult thing, to bring those people to the conversation. That's going to take time and just outreach and continually talking about it.
Yeah. And again, we still have a few more minutes, and depending on how long Becky is willing to stay with us, sometimes our Rheticus nights have gone even 2 full hours. So, Becky, you are a mother of young ones, and you are a very busy person, so we respect your time completely. But I just wanted to remind us that, if folks have responses that they would like to make, or other ideas, about the questions that are coming up, please, again, don't hesitate to either raise hand, unmute, or put those things in the chat. I'm going to go back up here. Marcus asks, what in your opinion is the most under-discussed effect of the pandemic?
Is there an aspect of the pandemic that has not been discussed to death at this point? That's a hard question. And you have to understand that I live in almost constant discussion and reading and thinking about the pandemic. So it's hard for me to know what people see and don't see, because this is, I live and breathe pandemic these days. So I can't answer that. I really don't know what's been discussed and what hasn't been discussed, because we're discussing everything.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. So Charles Young asks, please explain what kind of wild animal transferred COVID to humans. I mean, yeah, I thought that we knew, but maybe we don't know. Please, Becky.
We don't know. That press conference this morning was to say that it is almost certain that it was from a wild animal, and it is certain that it was not from the lab. But we don't know what the wild animal was. We still don't know what the wild animal necessarily responsible for SARS. We know that SARS came into civet cats, but it probably didn't start in civet cats. It probably started in some other. So the problem with these zoonotic spillovers, which a spillover is when a pathogen that's been transferred among wild creatures or non-human animals spills into the human population. So we think that bats are a source for many of these. And there's some fascinating parts of biology that I won't go into, but it has to do with the evolution of flight in a mammal that has made bats more susceptible to just hold a lot of viruses and not be affected by them. But it probably didn't come directly from the bats, although it could have. It may have come through other routes, and we don't know yet. And we may never know.
I suppose frustrating in a sense, right? Yeah. We have a question from either Matt or Priscilla, because I think it's Priscilla who registered, but but it's on Matt's account here. So as an epidemiologist and person of faith, and I know that both of these folks are clergy. So at what time or what conditions would you consider it appropriate or responsible to return to quote unquote normal worship practices? Are you aware of any studies or information on ways that communal singing might be done in relative safety?
So I also serve on the St. Matthew's COVID committee. So we were just discussing this last week. It's a hard question. I know we all miss communal worship. As an epidemiologist, I'll say communal singing is going to have to wait, I'm afraid. Maybe outdoors we can manage some communal singing with plenty of distance, but indoor communal singing is just going to have to wait until we've got everybody's vaccinated, or as many people as possible are vaccinated, and we're not seeing cases anymore. I have friends in New Zealand and Australia, and they can absolutely sing in church, and I am very jealous of them. But it's going to be a long time here. Other normal worship practices, I mean, quiet prayer and listening to a sermon together is not bad, as long as the ventilation in the room is good. But it's a hard decision, and it's also a decision that everybody involved has to make for themselves, because we know that there is no safe, there is safer. So I could design a worship service that is safer, but it's never going to be 100% safe.
So important for us to hear that, and hard, but
Mm.
real, and very important, I think, for us to keep that in mind. Yeah, yeah, thanks. There's a question from an Amy C. Thorin. I think that's me. I am curious to know your personal opinion about how CU has handled COVID-19. I have high respect for Julie Pride and for you and for the Shield team. So I have just this, really, really high opinion about how things have worked here. Yeah, we're getting some thumbs up in the Zoom room boxes there. Do you believe that we've, how do you feel about how we've handled it? Do you think that the vaccine is being rolled out in a just way? What could be improved, et cetera?
Yeah, so I have to start by saying that I've known and liked Julie Pride and Awais Vade for years. They're really wonderful people, and I am so grateful to live here where they're in charge, and that they have a public health district, which means that they're allowed a little bit more leeway from the state. So they've been able to make some decisions that have kept us all a lot safer here than in our surrounding communities. We are so lucky to have them. They are working really hard. And in case you didn't know this, there are people who are out on the street have to wear body cameras for the last few months because they've been attacked because of the threats of violence against public health.
Even right here in Champaign-Urbana?
Even here in Champaign-Urbana, one of our people on campus was randomly punched one day on campus. And this was a student worker, because people are reacting violently, which is difficult to deal with. And it's certainly one reason that I didn't want to be very vocal and visible about our response, because I have small children.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of women, especially in public health, have been pushed out or threatened with violence in the course of this. So we're very lucky to have Julie and Awais and all that they do.
Yeah.
As for the vaccine rollout, it's I can't complain too much because I managed to get my first shot last week, and I'm very grateful that I got that opportunity. And it's because veterinarians are considered food workers, and so the entire veterinary college was put on the list. There are probably ways we could improve, but one of the things that they've prioritized is getting shots into arms. And one thing that they knew early on is that the faster they got shots into arms, the more shots they would get for the county. And this is horrible to think about from a justice perspective, because they have kept our county safer than many of our surrounding communities. But our county will also get more vaccine faster because of their work. So from a justice perspective, that is a difficult thing. On the other hand, the important thing now is to get shots into arms.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that if we can start controlling things in this community, get vaccination levels up, that we can start to reach out to others.
Yeah.
As far as within our county, things that could be done better, we have a lot of disparities. And this is one thing that I've really learned in the last couple of years, is the level of poverty in Champaign County is much higher than we think. We think that this is a rich community, and it is with the university, but we have pockets of extreme poverty, and we have pockets of undocumented workers, and those people have been affected greatly by this pandemic. And that's where a lot of our, we focus on the campus cases because we're testing everybody twice a week. We see all of the cases, and then we have the people who go out and party while they're infected. So we get clusters, and we focus on that because the numbers are big. But the areas where we barely have eyes at all, because it's hard to get there, and they don't have access to the testing, even at the Marketplace Mall, which is not an accessible site, honestly. We know that there's a raging pandemic in a lot of these communities, and that's something we could do better. But I know CUPHD has wanted to be out there, and they're just not being given the resources. They don't run the testing at Marketplace Mall. They have no say over it. So when the National Guard came in and was running it, that was not their choice, and they would have actually recommended against it. Because if there's anything that's going to keep an undocumented person from getting tested, it's pulling up to a site and seeing a lot of military there.
Yeah, right.
So,
Becky, are there plans to get the vaccine to undocumented folks? Is that possible?
the citizenship status and documentation should not affect whether or not you qualify for the vaccine. The bigger problem is going to be the problems of accessibility as far as signing up for doses. And I don't know what their plans are for those communities rolling out the vaccines. I'm not even on the campus vaccine committee. We've got enough doing with testing, but
absolutely.
It definitely is going to be something that will have to be worked through the community rather than through these testing sites in the old dress barn or in the iHotel.
Yeah.
So we're working on getting testing out to those communities, and what we're doing is working through their churches and working through community organizations that work with them already, because that's the only way to reach them.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. There is another question from Susanna who asks, does it appear that surface transmission is completely unlikely?
Highly unlikely. Yes. Yes. Surface transmission is really not something you have to worry about, except for very high touch surfaces like bathroom door handles. But in general, not something to worry about as long as you wash your hands a lot. It's all about ventilation. So wear your masks, wear 2 masks. I now double mask, and I recommend everybody wear 2 masks. You have a paper underneath your cloth.
Wow. Do you want to explain any more details about that for those who might not quite conceive it?
So the paper masks are actually better filtration, but because paper doesn't conform to your face very well, it doesn't get a very snug fit. Cloth masks have a very snug fit. So if you wear a paper mask and then you put a cloth mask over top, it gives you a snugger fit with the better filtration of the paper. Or you could have a mask with a cloth mask with a filter insert. Either works.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. You can probably see that question that just came in, and we are caught up with our questions, so we can go right to that one. What are the best practices regarding reusing N95, KN95 respirators?
I'm not an expert on N95, KN95. What I've seen from people is that wear it for a week. Definitely wash your masks, at least your cloth masks, at least once a week. Yeah. Try not to get sick from your mask.
Yeah. Yes. We are after 8 o'clock. There are no more questions coming in. I guess, Becky, if you can still hang on for just a couple minutes, I would ask if there are any final questions. We always, I'm sure that Becky enjoys fielding all the kind of more purely scientific questions. But this is also such a unique opportunity to ask somebody who is both in science and a person of faith speaking publicly like this. So any other burning questions? We have some thanks coming in now. Yes, and thank you, Becky, so very, very, very much for the work that you do, because yeah, you have helped us see that the risks are real. I think we probably all knew that, but maybe didn't know those details that you explained. And so I can say that our community will keep you in prayer, and all folks who are doing the kind of work that you're doing.
Much appreciated.
Yeah. Any other final questions? The recording will be available as soon as our tech person, Daryl Holman, takes it from his computer and gets it loaded up onto YouTube. We're hoping that that could happen within the next couple of days. I think our goal would be the end of the week. And yeah, we will make sure, we'll probably also send this recording out to everybody who registered, just so that you will be able, of course, to, to share it or to view it again. Yeah, any other, it looks like there are no other questions. I certainly probably could have written or asked about 50 more questions, Becky. Your presentation was really, really, really fascinating and heartfelt. And thank you. Thank you so very much for being with us this evening.
Thank you. And thank you for putting up with my rambling.
Not rambling at all. It's just absolutely wonderful. So yeah, maybe a Zoom round of applause, either by emoji or or whatever you do behind your muting buttons. So yeah, again, thank you so much for those who are with us tonight. We please, if you have other ideas or wishes for Rheticus conversations, please don't hesitate to write us at St. Andrews Lutheran, either my personal email there or my work email there, or our office administrator, Mary. We love to take the ideas. It makes it a lot easier for us to go ahead and plan more of these. So again, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Becky. Give your kitty cat a little chin scratch and your whole family a hello from us.
Definitely will do. Thank you all.
Yeah. Peace.